Chapter 11. Veni, Vidi, Vici. You can't be serious about this schedule of battles. Yes, I can. He's only at his army 3.5 weeks. I told you, we did computer simulations on probable results, and here is what the computer estimated Ender would do. We want to teach him, not give him a nervous breakdown. The computer knows him better than we do. The computer is also not famous for having mercy. If you wanted to be merciful, you should have gone to a monastery. You mean this isn't a monastery? This is better for Ender, too. We're bringing him to his full potential. I thought we'd give him 2 years as commander. We usually give them a battle every 2 weeks, starting after 3 months. This is a little extreme. Do we have 2 years to spare? I know. I just have this picture of Ender a year from now, completely useless, worn out, because he was pushed farther than he or any living person could go. We told the computer that our highest priority was having the subject remain useful after the training program. Well, as long as he's useful... Look, Colonel Graff, you're the one who made me prepare this over my protests, if you'll remember. I know you're right. I shouldn't burden you with my conscience, but my eagerness to sacrifice little children in order to save mankind is wearing thin. The Polomark has been to see the hegemon. It seems Russian intelligence is concerned that some of the active citizens on the nets are already figuring out how America ought to use the IF to destroy the Warsaw Pact as soon as the buggers are destroyed. Seems premature. Seems insane. Free speech is one thing, but to jeopardize the League over nationalistic rivalries. And it's for people like that, short-sighted, suicidal people, that we're pushing Ender to the edge of human endurance. I think you underestimate Ender. But I fear that I also underestimate the stupidity of the rest of mankind. Are we absolutely sure that we ought to win this war? Sir, those words sound like treason. It was black humor. It wasn't funny. When it comes to the buggers, nothing is funny. I know. Ender Wiggin lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Since being a commander, he never slept more than 5 hours a night, but the lights went off at 2200 and didn't come on again until 600. Sometimes he worked at his desk. Anyway, straining his eyes on to use the dim display. Usually, though, he stared at the invisible ceiling and thought. Either the teachers had been kind to him after all, or he was a better commander than he thought. His ragged little group of veterans, utterly without honor and their previous armies, were blossoming into capable leaders. So much so that instead of the usual 4 tunes, he had created 5, each with a tune leader and a second. Every veteran had a position. He had the army drill in 8-man tune maneuvers and 4-man half tunes, so that he could, at a single command, his army could be assigned as many as 10 separate maneuvers and carry them out at once. No army had ever fragmented itself like that before, but Ender was not planning to do anything that had been done before either. Most armies practiced mass maneuvers, performing strategies. Ender had none. Instead, he trained his tune leaders to use their small units effectively in achieving limited goals, unsupported, alone, and on their own initiative. He staged mock wars after the first week, savage affairs in the practice room that left everybody exhausted. But he knew with less than a month of training that his army had the potential of being the best fighting group ever to play the game. How much of this did the teachers plan? Did they know they were giving him obscure but excellent boys? Did they give him 30 launchies, many of them underage, because they knew the little boys were quick learners, quick thinkers? Or was this what any similar group could become under a commander who knew what he wanted to do with his army, and who knew how to teach them to do it? The question bothered him, because he wasn't sure whether he was confounding or fulfilling their expectations. All he was sure of was that he was eager for battle. Most armies needed 3 months because they had to memorize dozens of elaborate formations. We're ready now. Get us into battle. The door opened in the darkness. Ender listened. A shuffling step. The door closed. He rolled off his bunk and crawled into the darkness, the 2 meters to the door. There was a slip of paper there. He couldn't read it, of course, but he knew what it was. Battle. How kind of them. I wish and they deliver. Ender was already dressed in his Dragon Army flash suit when the lights came on. He ran down the corridor at once, and by 6:01 he was at the door of his army's barracks. We have a battle with Rabbit Army at 0700. I want us warmed up in gravity and ready to go. Strip down and get to the gym. Bring your flash suits and we'll go to the battle room from there. What about breakfast? I don't want anybody throwing up in the battle room. Can we at least take a leak first? No more than a deciliter. They laughed. The ones who didn't sleep naked stripped down. Everyone bundled up their flash suits and followed Ender at a jog through the corridors to the gym. He put them through the obstacle course twice, then split them into the rotations on the tramp, the mat, and the bench. Don't wear yourselves out, just wake yourselves up. He didn't need to worry about exhaustion. They were in good shape, light and agile, and above all, excited about the battle to come. A few of them spontaneously began to wrestle. The gym, instead of being tedious, was suddenly fun because of the battle to come. Their confidence was the supreme confidence of those who have never been in contest and think they are ready. Well, why shouldn't they think so? They are, and so am I. At 0640, he had them dress out. He talked to the toon leaders and their seconds while they dressed. Rabbit Army is mostly veterans, but Karn Karby was made their commander only 5 months ago, and I never fought them under him. He was a pretty good soldier, and Rabbit has done fairly well in the standings over the years, but I expect to see formations, so I'm not worried. At 0650, he made them all lie down on the mats and relax. Then, at 0656, he ordered them up, and they jogged along the corridor to the battle room. Ender occasionally leaped up to touch the ceiling. The boys all jumped to touch the same spot on the ceiling. Their ribbon of color led to the left. Rabbit Army had already passed through to the right, and at 0658 they reached their gate to the battle room. The toons lined up in 5 columns. A and E were ready to grab the side handholds and flip themselves out towards the sides. B and D lined up to catch the 2 parallel ceiling holds and flip upwards into null gravity. C-toon were ready to slap the sill of the doorway and flip downward. Up, down, left, right. Ender stood at the front, between the columns so he'd be out of the way, and reoriented him. Which way is the enemy's gate? Down, they all said, laughing. And in that moment, up became north, down became south, and left became right, and right became east and west. The gray wall in front of them disappeared, and the battle room was visible. It wasn't a dark game, but it wasn't a bright one either. The lights were about half, like dusk. In the distance, the dim light, he could see the enemy door, their lighted flash suits already pouring out. Ender knew a moment's pleasure. Everyone had learned the wrong lesson from Bonzo's misuse of Enderwigan. They all dumped through the door immediately so that there was no chance to do anything other than to name the formation they would use. Commanders didn't have time to think. Well, Ender would take the time, and trust his soldiers' ability to fight when flashed legs to keep them intact as they came late through the door. Ender sized up the shape of the battle room, the familiar open grid of early games, like the monkey bars at the park, with 7 or 8 stars scattered throughout the grid. There were enough of them, and in forward enough positions that they were worth going for. Spread to the near stars, Ender said. See? Try to slide the wall, if it works. If it works, A and E will follow. If it doesn't, I'll decide from there. I'll be with D. Move. All the soldiers knew what was happening, but tactical decisions were entirely up to toon leaders. Even with Ender's instructions, they were only 10 seconds late getting through the gate. Rabbit Army was already doing some elaborate dance down at the end of the room. In all the other armies Ender had fought in, he would have been worrying right now about making sure he and his toon were in their proper place in their own formation. Instead, he and all his men were only thinking of ways to slip around past the formation, control the stars and the corners of the room, and then break the enemy formation into meaningless chunks that didn't know what they were doing. Even with less than 4 weeks together, the way they fought already seemed like the only intelligent way, the only possible way. Ender was almost surprised that Rabbit Army didn't know already that they were hopelessly out of date. C-toon slipped along the wall, coasting in with their bent knees facing the enemy. Crazy Tom, the leader of C-toon, had apparently ordered his men to flash their own legs already. It was a pretty good idea in this dim light, since the lighted flash suits went dark wherever they were frozen. It made them less easily visible. Ender would commend him for that. Rabbit Army was able to drive back C-toon's attack, but not until Crazy Tom and his boys had carved them up, freezing a dozen rabbits before retreating to the safety of the star. but it was the star behind the rabbit formation, which meant they were going to be easy pickings now. Han Zu, commonly called Hot Soup, was the leader of D-Tune. He quickly slid along the lip of the star to where Ender knelt. "How about flipping off the north wall and kneeling on their faces?" "Do it," Ender said. "I'll take B south and get behind them." Then he shouted, "A&E, slow on the walls." He slid footward along the star, hooked his feet on the lip, and flipped him up to the top wall, then rebounded down to E-Tune's star. In a moment he was leading them down against the south wall. They rebounded in near-perfect unison and came up behind the two stars that Karn Carnaby's soldiers were defending. It was like cutting butter with a hot knife. Rabbit Army was gone. Just a little clean-up left to do. Ender broke his tunes up into half-tunes to scour the corners for any enemy soldiers who were wholly or merely damaged. In the 3 minutes his tune leaders reported the room clean. Only one of Ender's boys was completely frozen, one of C-Tune, which had borne the brunt of the assault, and only 5 were disabled. Most were damaged, but those were leg shots, and many of them were self-inflicted. All in all, they had gone even better than Ender had expected. Ender and his tune leaders do the honors at the gate. 4 helmets at the corners, and crazy time to pass through the gate. Most commanders took whoever was left alive to pass the gate. Ender could have picked practically anyone. A good battle. The lights went full, and Major Anderson himself came through the teacher gate at the south end of the battle room. He looked very solemn as he offered Ender the teacher hook that was ritually given to the victor in the game. Ender used it to thaw his own army's flash suits, of course, and he assembled them into tunes before thawing the enemy. Crisp military appearance. That's what he wanted when Carby and Rabbit Army got their bodies under control again. They may curse us and lie about us, but they'll remember that we destroyed them. And no matter what they say, other soldiers and other commanders will see that in their eyes. In those rabbit eyes, they'll see us in neat formation, victorious and almost undamaged in our first battle. Dragon Army isn't going to be an obscure name for long. Karn Carby came to Ender as soon as he was unfrozen. He was a 12-year-old who had apparently made commander only in the last year at school, so he wasn't cocky like the ones who made it at 11. "I will remember this," thought Ender, "when I am defeated, to keep dignity and give honor where it's due so that the defeat is not disgrace, and I hope I don't have to do it often." Anderson dismissed Dragon Army last, after Rabbit Army had struggled through the door that Ender's boys had come through. Then Ender led his army through the enemy's door. The light along the bottom door reminded them of which way was down once they got back to gravity. They all landed lightly on their feet, running. They assembled in the corridor. "It's 07:15, Ender said, "and that means you have 15 minutes for breakfast before I see you all in the battle room for the morning practice." He could hear them silently saying, "Come on, we won, let us celebrate." "All right," Ender answered, "you may. And you have your commander's permission to throw food at each other during breakfast." They laughed, they cheered, and then he dismissed them and sent them jogging on to the barracks. He caught his tune leader on the way out and told them that he wouldn't expect anyone to come to practice until 07:45, and that practice would be over early so the boys could shower. Half an hour for breakfast and no shower right after battle. It was still stingy, but it would look lenient compared to 15 minutes. And Ender liked having the announcement of the extra 15 minutes come from the tune leaders. Let the boys learn that leniency comes from their tune leaders, and that harshness from their commanders. It will bind them better in the small, tight knots of this fabric. Ender ate no breakfast. He wasn't hungry. Instead, he went to the bathroom and showered, putting his flash suit in the cleaner so it would be ready when he dried off. He washed himself twice and let the water run and run on him. It would all be recycled. Let everybody drink some of my sweat today. They had given him an untrained army, and he had won. Not just nip and tuck, either. He had won with only 6 frozen or disabled. Let's see how long other commanders keep using their formations now that they've seen what a flexible strategy can do. He was floating around in the middle of the bathroom when his soldiers began to arrive. No one spoke to him, of course. He would speak, they knew, when he was ready, and not before. When all were there, Ender hooked himself near them and looked at them one by one. "Good first battle," he said, which was excuse enough for a cheer and an attempt to start a chant of "Dragon, dragon," which he quickly stopped. "Dragon Army did all right against rabbits, but the enemy isn't always going to be that bad. And if they had been a good army, Sea-Tune, your approach was so slow they would have had you from the flanks before you got into good position. You should have split and angled in from 2 directions so they couldn't flank you. A and E, your aim was wretched. The tallies show that you averaged only 1 hit for every 2 soldiers. That means that most of the hits were made by attacking soldiers close in. That can't go on. A competent enemy would cut up the assault force unless they have much better cover from the soldiers at a distance. I want every tune to work on distance marksmanship and moving and unmoving targets. Half tunes take turns being targets. I'll thaw the flash suits every 3 minutes. Now move." "Will we have any stars to work with?" asked Hot Soup. "To steady our aim?" "No, I want you to get used to having something to steady. I don't want you to get used to having something to steady your arms. If your arm isn't steady, freeze your elbows. Now move." The tune leaders quickly got things going, and Ender moved from the group to make suggestions and help soldiers who were having particular trouble. The soldiers knew by now that Ender could be brutal in the way he talked to groups, but when he worked with an individual he was always patient, explaining as often as necessary, making suggestions quietly, listening to questions and problems and explanations. But he never laughed when they tried to banter with him, and they soon stopped trying. He was commander every moment they were together. He had to remind them of it. He simply was. They worked all day with the taste of victory in their mouths, and cheered again when they broke half an hour early for lunch. Ender held the tune leaders until regular lunch hour to talk about the tactics they had used and to evaluate the work of their individual soldiers. Then he went to his own room and methodically changed into his uniform for lunch. He would enter the commander's mess about 10 minutes late, exactly the timing that he wanted. Since this was his first victory, he had never seen the inside of the commander's mess hall and had no idea what new commanders were expected to do. But he did know that he wanted to enter last today, when the scores of the morning's battles were already posted. Dragon Army will not be an obscure name now. There was no great stir when he came in, but when some of them noticed how small he was and saw the dragons on the sleeve of the uniform, they stared at him openly, and by the time he got his food and sat at a table, the room was silent. Ender began to eat, slowly and carefully, pretending not to notice that he was the center of attention. Gradually, conversation and noise started up again, and Ender could relax enough to look around. One entire wall of the room was a scoreboard. Soldiers were kept aware of an army's overall record for the past 2 years. In here, however, records were kept for each commander. A new commander couldn't inherit a good standing from his predecessor. He was ranked according to what he had done. Ender had the best ranking, a perfect 1-lost record, of course, but in the other categories he was far ahead. Average soldiers disabled, average enemy disabled, average time elapsed before victory. In every category he was ranked first. When he was nearly through eating, someone came up behind him and touched his shoulder. "Mind if I sit?" Ender didn't have to turn around to know it was Dink Meeker. "Ho, Dink," said Ender. "Sit." "You gold-plated fart," said Dink cheerfully. "We're all trying to decide whether your scores up there are a miracle or a mistake." "A habit," said Ender. "One victory is not a habit," Dink said. "Don't get cocky. When you're new, they seed you against the weak commanders. Karn Karby isn't exactly on the bottom of the rankings." It was true. Karby was just about in the middle. "He's okay," Dink said, "considering that he only just started. Shows some promise. You don't show promise, you show threat." "Threat to what? Do they feed you less if I win? I thought you told me that all this was a stupid game and none of it mattered." Dink didn't like having his words thrown back at him. Not under these circumstances. "You were the one who got me playing along with them, but I'm not playing games with you, Ender. You won't beat me." "Probably not," Ender said. "I taught you," Dink said. "Everything I know," Ender said. "I'm just playing it by ear right now." "Congratulations," said Dink. "It's good to know I have a friend here." But Ender wasn't sure Dink was his friend anymore. Neither was Dink. After a few empty sentences, Dink went back to his table. Ender looked around when he was through with his meal. There were quite a few small conversations going on. Ender spotted Bonzo, who was now one of the oldest commanders. Rose the Nose had graduated. Petra was with a group in the far corner, and she didn't look at him once. Since most of the others stole glances at him from time to time, including the ones Petra was talking with, Ender was pretty sure she was deliberately avoiding his glance. That's the problem with winning right from the start, thought Ender. You lose friends. Give them a few weeks to get used to it. By the time I have my next battle, things will have calmed down in here. Karn Karby made a point of coming to greet Ender before the lunch period ended. It was, again, a gracious gesture, and, unlike Dink, Karby did not seem wary. Right now I'm in disgrace, he said frankly. They won't believe me when I tell them you did things that nobody's ever seen before, so I hope you beat the snot out of the next army you fight, as a favor to me. As a favor to you, Ender said, and thanks for talking to me. I think they're treating you pretty badly. Usually new commanders are cheered when they first join the mess, but then usually a new commander has a few defeats under his belt before he makes it in here. I only got in here a month ago. If anybody deserves a cheer, it's you. But that's life. Make 'em eat dust. I'll try. Karn Karby left, and Ender mentally added him to his private list of people who also qualified as human beings. That night, Ender slept better than he had in a long time. Slept so well, in fact, that he didn't wake up until the lights came on. He woke up feeling good, jogged on out to take a shower, and did not notice the piece of paper on his floor until he came back and started dressing in his uniform. He only saw the paper because it moved in the wind as he snapped out the uniform to put it on. He picked up the paper and read it. Petra Arcanian, Phoenix Army, 0700. It was his old army, the one he had left less than 4 weeks before, and he knew their formations backward and forward. Partly because of Ender's influence, they were the most flexible of armies, responding relatively quickly to new situations. Phoenix Army would be the best able to cope with Ender's fluid, unpatterned attack. The teachers were determined to make life interesting for him. 0700, said the paper, and it was already 0630. Some of the boys might already be heading for breakfast. Ender tossed his uniform aside, grabbed his flash suit, and, in a moment, stood in the doorway of his army's barracks. Gentlemen, I hope you learned something yesterday, because today we're doing it again. It took a moment for them to realize that he meant a battle, not a practice. It had to be a mistake, they said. Nobody ever had battles 2 days in a row. He handed the paper to Fly Molo, the leader of Atun, who immediately shouted, "Flash suits!" and started changing clothes. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" demanded Hot Soup. Hot had a way of asking Ender questions that nobody else dared ask. "I thought you needed the shower," Ender said. "Yesterday Rabbit Army claimed we only won because the stink knocked them out." The soldiers who heard him laughed. Didn't find the paper till you got back from the showers, right?" Ender looked at the source of the voice. It was Bean, already in his flash suit, looking insolent. "Time to repay old humiliations, is that it, Bean?" "Of course," Ender said contemptuously. "I'm not as close to the floor as you are." More laughter. Bean flushed with anger. "It's plain we can't count on the old ways of doing things," Ender said, "so you'd better plan on battles any time. And often. I can't pretend like I like the way they're screwing around with us, but I do like one thing, that I've got an army that can handle it." After that, if he had asked them to follow him to the moon without spacesuits, they would have done it. Petra was not Karn Karby. She had more flexible patterns and responded much more quickly to Ender's darting, improvised, unpredictable attack. As a result, Ender had 3 boys flashed and 9 disabled at the end of the battle. Petra was not gracious about bowing over his hand at the end, either. The anger in her eyes seemed to say, "I was your friend, and you humiliate me like this?" Ender pretended not to notice her fury. He figured that after a few more battles she'd realize that, in fact, she had scored more hits against him than he expected anyone ever would again, and he was still learning from her. In practice today, he would teach his toon leaders how to counter the tricks Petra had played on them. Soon they would be friends again. He hoped.